When an avoidant and an empath both choose to step into no contact, something happens that very few people ever discuss. And it is not the simple story most people believe. Many assume the empath is the one who breaks down, while the avoidant walks away peacefully, unaffected, and completely fine. But the reality is much more complicated than that. What happens inside both people is a deep emotional battle that most outsiders never see. It is not just about losing a relationship. It is about losing a connection that was shaping how they viewed themselves. When these two personalities separate, they do not only lose each other, they lose the emotional reflection they had been using to understand their own fears, needs, and patterns. And once that reflection disappears, everything begins to change. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, we are going to explore what happens inside both of them after no contact begins, how their emotions shift over time, and why so many people make the same mistake that brings them right back into the same painful cycle. If you have experienced this kind of connection, or if you are currently living through it, you may recognize yourself in these moments. Before we continue, write the word mirror in the comments. Just one word. It shows that you are truly present, that you are listening, and it helps this message reach others who may need to hear it. And if you are interested in understanding deeper emotional patterns, relationships, and human behavior, subscribe, because this is exactly what we explore here. Now, let us go back to the very first moment when no contact actually begins. Not the moment when someone thinks about doing it. Not the conversations with friends, not the late-night decisions, not the promises to finally create distance. I mean the exact moment when the final message is delivered, the last conversation ends, and the silence becomes real. That single moment when communication stops and the emotional space appears. For the empath, it can feel like stepping into an unknown darkness while still holding on to hope. For the avoidant, it can initially feel like pressure has finally been removed and they can breathe again. And inside those two opposite reactions is where the entire emotional journey begins. To understand what happens next, we have to understand the invisible pattern that existed between them throughout the relationship. Many times, neither person fully realizes the role they are playing. The empath is someone who experiences emotions with incredible depth. They do not simply notice feelings, they often absorb them. They sense changes in energy, shifts in mood, small differences in behavior, and emotions that are never spoken out loud. They are often the person who notices something is wrong before the other person even admits it to themselves. They see the hesitation in a response. They hear the difference in a voice. They feel the emotional distance growing before there is any clear explanation. This sensitivity can be a beautiful strength, but inside a relationship with an avoidant partner, it can also become exhausting. They start monitoring, understanding, adjusting, and trying to repair things before problems even fully appear. They become deeply connected to their partner's emotional world, sometimes forgetting to protect their own. The avoidant, on the other hand, often has a nervous system that learned early in life to create distance when emotions become overwhelming. This does not always come from a dramatic experience. Sometimes it develops from growing up with emotional unavailability, where feelings were ignored, minimized, or never openly discussed. Sometimes expressing needs brought disappointment, criticism, or silence. Over time, they learn that depending on others could feel risky. So when emotional closeness becomes intense, their instinct is often not to move closer, but to create space. And this is where the painful cycle begins. The empath moves closer because they want connection. The avoidant moves away because they feel overwhelmed. The more one reaches, the more the other retreats. And both people end up feeling misunderstood. Just silence. And slowly, that child begins to believe something painful. Emotions are dangerous. Closeness is risky. And depending on yourself is the only thing you can truly trust. That child eventually grows into an adult who deeply wants love and connection, but at the exact same time feels afraid of the vulnerability that comes with it. They desire intimacy, but when intimacy gets too close, their protective instincts activate, and this is where the connection between an empath and an avoidant becomes both powerful and painful. When these two people meet, something intense happens almost immediately. The empath often feels like they have discovered someone incredibly special, someone with hidden layers, someone carrying wounds beneath the surface that nobody else seems to notice. They see the good inside this person. They see the potential. They think, if I can just love them enough, if I can just show them they are safe, maybe they will finally open their heart. The avoidant, meanwhile, often experiences something they have not felt in a long time, being truly noticed. The empath's ability to sense their emotions can feel almost unbelievable. Someone understands them without demanding explanations. Someone recognizes their struggles without forcing them to expose every hidden part of themselves. The empath gives understanding, patience, acceptance, and emotional safety before the avoidant has even learned how to ask for it. And because of this, they become deeply drawn to each other, like two people who feel strangely familiar, but who also trigger each other's deepest fears. This is where the emotional pattern begins. The empath reaches out. The avoidant creates distance. The empath feels the distance and tries harder. The avoidant feels the increased closeness and pulls away even more. The empath starts believing the problem is that they have not given enough, loved enough, or proven their value enough. So they sacrifice more. They adjust more. They silence their own needs more. But the more they try to create security, the more the avoidant can feel overwhelmed and search for more space. And slowly, both people become trapped in a cycle where one person is chasing connection, while the other is protecting themselves from it. This pattern can continue for months, years, or even decades, until eventually something breaks. Sometimes the empath reaches a point of complete emotional exhaustion. Sometimes the avoidant reaches a point where the intensity feels impossible to handle. And sometimes both reach that breaking point at nearly the same time. That is when no contact begins. But here is what most people misunderstand. No contact is not simply the absence of messages, calls, or conversations. It becomes a completely different kind of emotional experience. The conversation does not disappear. It moves inward. It continues silently inside both people's minds. And what happens inside the empath and the avoidant during this silence can look completely opposite from the outside. But underneath, both are dealing with something much deeper. Let us look at the empath first. The first day of no contact usually does not feel like freedom. It does not feel like a peaceful victory or an easy decision. It feels like falling into uncertainty. The empath's nervous system has spent so long paying attention to the avoidant partner's emotions that suddenly losing that connection feels overwhelming. For months or years, they were constantly reading the signs. They noticed changes in tone. They noticed delayed replies. They noticed emotional shifts. They were always trying to understand what was happening beneath the surface. That constant emotional awareness consumed a huge amount of energy, and then suddenly there is nothing. No message, no update, no signal. The system that was always searching for connection does not simply turn off. It becomes restless. This is why many empaths find themselves checking their phones repeatedly. Not because they are incapable of moving forward, not because they lack strength, but because their mind is still searching for the familiar signal that once told them everything is okay. They replay conversations again and again, searching for answers. They analyze every word, every moment, every disagreement. They try to find the exact point where things changed. They are not doing this because they want to suffer. Their mind is trying to create a sense of understanding. It wants to find the missing piece. It wants to know what could have been done differently. Many empaths also experience guilt, even when the relationship was hurting them, even when they were the one who decided to walk away, because they often carry emotional responsibility for the people they love. The thought that the avoidant partner might be struggling alone, might be hurting silently, or might need them creates an intense inner conflict. But beneath the overthinking, beneath the urge to reach out, beneath the memories and the questions, there is a deeper challenge waiting for the empath. In the first weeks, they often face a painful identity question. Who am I when I am no longer trying to save, support, or understand someone else? Because many empaths have spent years defining themselves through their ability to care for others. They become the person who listens, the person who fixes, the person who carries emotional weight for everyone around them. And when that role suddenly disappears, They can feel lost. They are standing in the middle of their own emotional storm, trying to remember who they are outside of someone else's needs. This is not a sign of weakness. It is a natural human reaction when someone has invested so much of themselves into a connection. Now let us look at the avoidant. The first day of no contact often feels very different. At first, there can be a sense of relief. The emotional pressure feels lighter. The constant expectation to explain feelings, respond, or face difficult conversations suddenly disappears. And even though they may feel guilty about experiencing that relief, they often push that guilt away quickly because guilt requires them to sit with uncomfortable emotions. And sitting with intense emotions is something they have spent years learning to avoid. The space feels peaceful at first. The silence feels like a break. But what happens after that initial relief is where the story becomes much more complicated. The constant pressure of feeling like someone needed more from them than they knew how to provide begins to disappear. The guilt of not being able to fully satisfy the empath's emotional world becomes quieter. The feeling of being watched, understood, and emotionally exposed by someone who could see through their defenses starts to fade. And in the beginning, that space can feel like freedom. For the first few days, and sometimes even the first couple of weeks, the avoidant may honestly feel okay. They keep themselves occupied. This is one of the strongest patterns in avoidant coping. They move into action. They stay busy. They focus on anything that keeps them from sitting alone with uncomfortable emotions. They may work longer hours, spend more time at the gym, reconnect with old friends, or throw themselves into a new goal or personal project. They create a schedule so full that there is barely any room left for emotional reflection, and for a while it works. The distractions create temporary relief, but somewhere around the second or third week, something begins to shift. Something they did not expect starts happening. The silence changes. At first, silence felt peaceful. Now it starts to feel empty. Not the peaceful emptiness of chosen solitude, but a strange absence that they cannot easily explain. Small moments begin catching them off guard. They see something interesting and their first thought is to tell the empath. They hear a song that brings back a memory. They experience a difficult day and instinctively want to reach out to the person who used to understand them. For a brief second, their mind moves toward connection before reality reminds them that the person is no longer there. And when those emotions appear, the avoidant often responds the same way they always have. They push them away. They explain them logically. They convince themselves they are fine. They remind themselves of all the problems in the relationship. They focus on the moments when the empath felt overwhelming, too emotional, or too demanding. But constantly fighting against feelings requires energy. And eventually, that emotional resistance becomes exhausting. Here is something many people misunderstand about avoidant behavior during no contact. Avoiding emotions does not mean those emotions disappear. It simply means they are hidden beneath the surface. Feelings that are ignored do not vanish. They often find different ways to appear. The avoidant may become more irritated than usual. They may feel restless without understanding why. They might struggle to sleep, lose patience easily, or feel a strange emptiness during quiet moments. Some may fill every possible space with activity because stillness forces them to face what they have been avoiding. They may notice they are constantly searching for noise, tasks, or distractions because silence has started revealing emotions they did not want to acknowledge. And if they become brave enough to slow down, even for a short moment, they may discover something underneath all the productivity and independence. They miss the empath, but it usually does not appear as a dramatic realization at first. It comes quietly. It appears as a small feeling of absence, a missing presence, a reminder that someone who once understood them is no longer there. It feels like realizing the importance of something only after it is gone. But the avoidant often does not call it missing someone. That word feels too vulnerable. Instead, they create safer explanations. They tell themselves they are simply adjusting. They say they just need time. They believe they are focusing on themselves. They convince themselves that moving forward is the only answer. and they continue pushing ahead. At the same time, the empath begins experiencing a different transformation. Around the second or third week, the emotional storm starts becoming quieter. It is not complete peace yet. It is more like a tired stillness after a long battle. But inside that quiet, something important begins to happen. The empath starts reconnecting with themselves. Because when someone spends months or years constantly monitoring another person's emotions, their own inner voice can become almost invisible. They become focused on understanding someone else's moods, reactions, fears, and needs. They become experts at reading another person while slowly forgetting how to read themselves. Their attention is always directed outward. They become like an instrument constantly responding to another person's emotional frequency while forgetting what their own natural rhythm feels like. But when no contact removes that constant signal, something changes. The noise becomes quieter. And in that quiet, the empath begins hearing their own thoughts again. They begin noticing feelings they ignored, needs they abandoned, dreams they placed on hold. And sometimes what they discover is uncomfortable, because many empaths eventually have to ask themselves difficult questions. Was this only love, or was part of it the need to feel needed? Was I connected to this person, or was I attached to the hope of finally reaching them? Why did I keep proving my worth through patience and sacrifice? Why did I believe their distance was a challenge for me to overcome instead of a sign that we needed a different kind of connection? These questions are painful, but they are also powerful. Because healing begins when someone stops only analyzing the other person and starts understanding themselves. While the empath begins this inner transformation, the avoidant often reaches another emotional stage. Around the 4 to 6 week mark, their defenses can become harder to maintain. Something unexpected starts happening. They begin remembering the relationship differently. Human memory does not work like a perfect video recording. It changes depending on our emotional state. When someone feels loss, their mind often highlights the positive moments and softens the painful ones. This is why the avoidant may slowly stop focusing on the parts of the relationship that felt overwhelming. Instead, they begin remembering the warmth. They remember the moments when the empath understood them without judgment. They remember feeling accepted. They remember the beginning, when everything felt exciting and safe because there was less emotional pressure. The same qualities that once felt intense may now start feeling valuable. The empath's attention that once felt overwhelming may begin feeling rare. The connection they once tried to escape may begin feeling like something they lost. And this creates a powerful temptation. The avoidant starts wanting to reconnect. But this is where many people misunderstand what is happening. The desire to return does not always mean personal growth has happened. Sometimes it simply means the discomfort of losing someone has become stronger than the fear of emotional closeness. This is the difficult part of the cycle. The person who spent the relationship creating distance may suddenly become the person reaching out. They may send a simple message, something casual, something that does not feel too vulnerable. Hey, I was thinking about you. Hope you are doing well. Something reminded me of you today. How have you been? And when that message appears on the empath's phone after weeks of silence, it can feel overwhelming. It can feel like the answer they were secretly hoping for. It can feel like confirmation that the connection was real. It can feel like all the patience, understanding, and effort finally worked. It can feel like the avoidant finally chose them. But this is the exact moment where both people need the most awareness. Because the avoidant may not have changed yet. They may simply be reacting to the pain of absence. The distance became uncomfortable, so they reach back toward what once felt comforting. But without deeper emotional work, the old pattern returns quickly. The empath feels hope and begins opening their heart again. The avoidant feels closeness returning and starts feeling pressure again. One moves closer, the other creates space. The same cycle begins repeating, unless something truly different has happened internally. Unless the silence was used not only to miss each other, but to understand themselves. Because real change does not happen when someone simply wants the connection back. Real change happens when someone becomes different enough that the connection can finally become healthy. And that is what we need to explore next. What true growth actually looks like for both the empath and the avoidant.